I'm here with Frank H. Buckley. He's an academic. He's a professor at George Mason University. He's very well known in the States, and what's not very well known about him is that he was born in Saskatchewan, went to McGill University, and that's why he is here right now at the Manning Networking Conference. It's sort of like Canada's CPAC. It's where conservatives come to get a gauge on where the movement is and where it's going, and I'm so honored to have you join us today. So I want to ask you, because you just presented an awesome speech, and it was about the future of possible Trumpism here in Canada. Do you see a Trump-like movement, a populist movement akin to what we saw south of the 49th happening here in the Great White North?
Well, there are differences between the countries, and part of a difference is that we've already imported a great deal of Trumpism in Canada, to the extent that we have an immigration law in Canada and a tax law in Canada, and a rule of law in Canada that not merely would Americans generally emulate, but which the Trump cabinet would emulate. And specifically as to immigration, the new Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, is a longtime admirer of the Canadian system, and he will try at some point to introduce the Canadian system. So the sense of frustration that Americans have, or certainly had before the election, is not quite so evident here. But apart from that, the concern is to elitism and so on. That's certainly true, and it's certainly felt in Canada. And it's felt the more so because of a preening prime minister who seems to govern by selfies.
He does pay attention to Canadian politics, I told you. Okay, so I think that the frustration that you mentioned that happened south of the 49th is likely, if not right now, I think after several more years of Justin Trudeau at the helm, carbon taxes, etc., we'll see more of that frustration grow. But I want to pick up on what you mentioned, this anti-establishment, this anti-elite sentiment. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you see the media's role in either fostering that, almost perpetuating more of an anti-establishment sentiment among the people? Do you see that here in Canada as well, possibly?
You see it in Canada, you certainly see it in the States, but if you read, well, my reading is often directed to what Canadian newspapers say about Trump, and they do not have a single clue about what's going on. I mean, as far as they're concerned, basically the dark night of fascism is about to descend, and that, that's just silly. I think Americans reasonably responded to specific American problems and elected Trump to solve them. Whereas in Canada, you have many of those problems solved, but you still have the same kind of elitism. You have a tight group of people. I sort of think of it as government from the annex. Mm-hmm. The Toronto, right? So, the most self-righteous group of people you will find in Canada are people from places like Outremont or the Annex.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. These are the Margaret Atwoods of the world.
Right. They have
noblesse oblige.
Yeah, they have absolutely no knowledge of what's life is like elsewhere or what people feel, and they tend to be dismissive, and in particular with respect to people who say, for example, have religious objections or moral objections to euthanasia. They're simply backwards. I mean, a lot of that is built into, I think, to the Canadian psyche. There's sort of a respect for hierarchies in Canada that seems to be built into the psyche, but I think I think we're going to be near the tipping point here shortly, in which we're seeing a divergence between what the elites think and what ordinary Canadians think. We've seen that before.
Unlike America, where there's this flyover country that came out in droves to vote for Donald Trump, I think that there is a huge rural and urban divide, which you pointed to, and it's these downtown elites that have fallen out of touch with your average Joe Sixpacks at home. Okay, we're in the middle of a conservative leadership race right now, basically to rival Justin Trudeau for the top job in the country. Without speaking about specifics as the candidates themselves, what would you like to see coming out of a conservative leadership hopeful? Who do we need at the helm in order to gear this movement in the right direction?
I think you'd need somebody with perhaps a greater degree of anger than one sees or I saw in the candidates who too closely, I thought, resembled the other 16 candidates for the Republican nomination. Basically well-bred people. In French you say bien rangés. Okay, properly brought up, people who say sorry all the time. And what I'd like to see instead is John Diefenbaker. I'd like to see a rogue. I'd like to see somebody who gets angry and points his finger at the other side and says, you guys are a bunch of idiots. And it shames me that I know your names or see your faces. I'd like to see them act as they are, the adults in the room, dealing with a bunch of children who seem to, give us government which resembles soap bubbles from a little child's pipe.
Yeah. And you know what? There's substantive anger, there's pointed anger, and I think that a lot of Ontarians who check their hydro bills, Albertans who see their carbon tax baked into everything that they buy, they're angry, and it'd be nice to have someone at the helm who's a resurrection of Deef the Chief.
Absolutely, crazy as he was.
All right, well, thanks so much, and just know that you're always welcome in Canada. We'll take it back anytime.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it. If you like what you just saw, we talk a lot about Trump and Canadian politics. Click below and subscribe to our YouTube channel.